You sure you want you on the big screen there too?
Sure. Isn't that scary? Oh, that's. There we go. Good. You should have your handout from last week. If you don't, everybody have that?
Yep.
From last time? Okay.
Amen.
Good. I apologize for starting a little late. I was trying to get the certain videos to work. How's that? Is that better? Hear me okay? I do need to be amplified because it's better for the
Podcast.
yeah, the Facebook, yeah, the actual live. One second. There we go. Okay, good. Last time, I explained this book, the Book of Nothing that you have there is just for my brother. That was the thing. It's just for fun. But like I explained when the camera was off, it's fun for me. First off, I did a good job explaining what a lot of new atheists believe because he quotes it very well, but also because it's cool to see my brother who's come back to the faith care about this stuff, so that was exciting. But you can do what you want to with that. Okay.
Do you have any more of those?
I do. Yes, ma'am, right here. I do.
Okay, I'll grab
Yeah.
one later.
Anybody have a handout? If not, I'll get you one right now. If not, we're going to go ahead.
Is
Any
it
other
just
questions or
the one
comments?
you did? Is that all? Just the one you did?
The handout from last time should be just fine. Last time, I didn't get nearly as far as I'd hoped. So unfortunately, I was thinking about that. If it's okay with y'all, what I prefer to do, I prefer to have a long Q&A. We go back and forth for a year. That's what I really prefer to do. But we're not going to do that since I'm trying to do the 6 to 8 week deal. What I'll do, if it's okay with y'all, is I will cover a good bit of ground and pause. And if you have any questions, you can ask then. Is that okay? Versus entertaining. It's not because I don't care what you think. It's only because I'm trying to cover more ground. That's all. Hello. Okay. We've talked about some terms and definitions. If you're in your handout there, you should see how we talked about the various definitions of atheism and all kinds of things. Let me just real briefly, let's glance over this, how we talked about what religion is. And number 5, you should have number 5, that religion is the definition, a set of beliefs concerning the cause of blah, blah. But what I'm emphasizing here is that religion, what I'm trying to emphasize when I said last time, it actually represents something about the way the reality is. It's knowledge. If I said, Susan, sorry, I forgot to click record, that's a big deal. All those videos got me verklempt. Is that the word? Okay, there we go. Historically, religion was an idea of something about reality. If I said you're sitting at a table, I'm making a claim about reality. Nowadays, religion means something like it's a personal view. It's a reflection of something like personal preference, and that's what Christians do not believe. Christianity teaches that religion is really a way about how reality works. And here's some pens if you need them.
Oh, you're awesome.
Here we go. Sorry. And then we talked about different terms of atheism, agnosticism, and theism and deism. When we talk about worldviews, a worldview is a cognitive view of the world. It's kind of hard to describe or think about because we look through a worldview to conceptualize our reality. And the one that most people today, if you're an atheist, because atheism is not a worldview, it's not a belief, it's not a religion, naturalism is a worldview. And I give the analogy of the fish tank. The naturalist believes that all that exists is the fish tank. Everything. So the other person on the left, you can fill in the gaps, whatever you want. The naturalist will always say that whatever exists is made of matter and energy and so forth. And I'm going to go recover all that. But I will use the word naturalist or materialist interchangeably. In philosophy, sometimes they make big distinctions between those, or subtle distinctions. I won't, for the purpose of going forward. My point at this point is to remind you that there is no conflict between science and religion or science and Christianity. That's called a category error. They're very different things. Science is a methodology. It's how to discover how something works. That's all it is. Christianity is not a methodology. No one goes to a laboratory and say, what's the atomic weight of cobalt? I don't know, let's do it the Buddhist way. Let's do it the Jewish way. Let's do it the Christian way. That doesn't make any sense. Let's do it the poetic way. No, science. Let's just figure out how that works. So it's not science versus anything unless you're talking about another methodology. But rather, worldviews are at odds. Naturalism and Christianity are very different worldviews. There is a kind of belief that only one kind of methodology should be used. And of course, remember, that's logical positivism. You remember that, right, from last time? And that's where we finished last time. That's the, you might say, fancy technical word for it. But in popular language, what we typically say is that's called scientism. The belief that science answers every kind of possible truth. And then we talked about event and agent causation. And event causation is when we ask questions like, did they die of natural causes? So everything that's looking for a cause and effect, because that's what science is, looking for cause and effect. Agent causation asks a different kind of question. That assumes there's an agent or a person who might have caused something or has the why or how come can be of a purpose. Event causation doesn't care about purpose. There's no such thing as purpose. Back to my analogy from last time. If I had a billiard table, pool table, and I record all the videos, the balls hit toom, 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 and I stop at the end one and go, why did that ball move? Well, because that ball hit it, the laws of physics and friction on this, and the laws of momentum. Well, then why did it move? Because another ball hit it, and I go all the way back, and I go, well, does it go back forever? Well, no. Well, when did the first ball move? Why did it move? There's no more balls on the table. Did a bird get it? No bird. It's because Mary pushed the ball. At some point, I've got to come to an agent to explain how it started. It's like that when someone said they died of natural causes or they were murdered or homicide, and that's a big distinction. And I'm bringing this up because people who believe in this form of understanding of scientism, and it doesn't matter if they say that, they don't wear a badge or something with a little hat that says, I believe in scientism or logical positivism. Most people have never even heard of those terms. But we do in philosophy and theology know these terms. But if you ask them, what kind of causes do you believe in? They're never going to say, if they're being real strict, they're never going to say an agent causation. No one murders anyone. Everything can be explained by natural causes. Everything. And so that's why they disregard agent causation. Now, what I wanted to do is, the videos on my laptop work perfectly, but as soon as I plug in an HDMI cable, it makes the video real jerky like that. So what I'm going to do is, I want to show a quick video by a guy named Robert Barron. He's a Catholic bishop, and this is a real good point. He's going to reinforce what I just said, but I want you to, if you can, just for a few minutes, listen to this.
Number 3, religion and science. Friends, almost every day, usually several times a day, I'm dealing with this problem of religion and science. It blocks so many people, I find, in approaching or accepting the faith. What's the problem? Well, in a word, it's what I call scientism. What's scientism? It's not science. I love science. Affirm it. Scientism, though, is the reduction of all knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge. And if you had told me this 10 years ago, I'd never believe you. But it is rampant in our society, especially in young people, because I hear it all the time. The reduction of knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge. Now, what's scientific form? Observe, empirical observation. Form a hypothesis. Test it through experimentation. Draw conclusions. Good method? Yep, it's a great method. Effective? You bet, within its proper framework. The attendant technologies it's given rise to? Wonderful? Yes. And that's why, I think, is one reason why scientism begins to take hold. Because people have seen the huge success of the sciences. And they say, that's the way to know things. Now, what's the upshot of that in regard to religion? Religion ain't science. Therefore, it's what? Nonsense. How often I hear this, it comes right out of Christopher Hitchens. Bronze Age mythology. Old superstition. pre-scientific nonsense. And the disciples of Hitchens are everywhere out there. Scientism relegates religion just to the kind of ash heap of intellectual history. What do we do now with scientism? How do we respond to it? Here's the first way. Scientism is itself logically incoherent. How come? Where did you empirically observe or experimentally verify that all truth is simply scientific? Where did you see that? Where did you experiment with that? How did you draw that as an empirical conclusion? The answer, of course, is you didn't. Scientism is itself a metaphysical or philosophical position. And therefore, the advocate of scientism is lost in a deep incoherence. See, that little move does something great. It opens you up now. That in fact, you are always already engaged in other ways of knowing beyond the scientific. Another way I've teased people who are caught in scientism, do you think Homer knew anything worth knowing? Do you think Aristotle knew anything worth knowing? How about Plato? How about Cicero? How about Augustine or Thomas Aquinas? Martin Luther? How about Immanuel Kant? How about Hegel? How about the Niebuhr brothers? Do you think those people knew anything worth knowing? None of them engaged in what we call science. Art, philosophy, poetry, literature. Do they yield up to us any truth? See, of course, anyone, I think, who's intellectually honest would say, of course they do. And yet they are not scientific forms of knowing. I've teased people often on this score, because I found that they don't know philosophy well. They don't know poetry well. And see, religion is a close cousin of philosophy and poetry and literature. Here's one of the problems, too, with scientism. So many people believe the great modern myth of origins. By which I mean, modernity, science emerged out of a long twilight struggle with religion. Does that sound familiar? I hear it every day. How did the sciences emerge? Well, out of this terrible struggle against the obscurantism of religion. Back in those dark ages, right? By the way, which gave us Chartres Cathedral and Dante and Thomas Aquinas. It wasn't so dark, believe me. But out of this terrible dark ages, there emerged, against the terrible struggle, there emerged the sciences. Who's the patron saint of this story? Galileo, whom I hear about, again, practically every day on these forums. Oh, how the church persecuted poor Galileo, imprisoning this pioneer of modern science. And that becomes the paradigm in many people's minds for the relationship between religion and science. So it's always gone. Well, can I suggest to you, friends, that that is a complete myth. And the fact that it seized the minds of so many of our younger people is really sad and tragic. I would argue on the
I'm going to pause there and go back. If you don't know Robert Barron, his father Robert Barron, he's great. Besides his Catholicism, I agree with so much of what he says. He's really good, and he's on the cutting edge in the Roman Catholic movement. He's the dean of a Catholic school, and he deals a lot with atheism online. He deals a lot online with real people on YouTube and so forth talking about it, and it's really great. There are certain facts, and to repeat this, I'll move on very quickly. There are certain facts of existence science can't possibly explain. So this doesn't mean you're anti-science, it just means it can't possibly explain it. Because of the nature of the thing being explained. Things that are not composed of matter and energy. For example, every single historical event that has ever occurred. Ever. Science doesn't give us history. It means you should never believe in anything historical because you can't put it in a laboratory and test the results. Think about that. Every history department in the world is now dumb. That's what they would say, it's a dumb idea. Philosophical truths don't exist, political truths don't exist, culinary arts don't matter, artwork, DNA, on and on and on it goes. None of this exists, even rigorous scientists exist in their normal world by making every single conclusion based on the scientific method. But if you talk to the average, somewhat well-educated atheist, they will, at some level, probably assume this kind of scientism. Now, before I give you a whole list of things that I think demonstrate naturalism and scientism can't trust it to ever give us a satisfactory answer, please understand that I wouldn't place your faith in science for the lack of knowledge of science. I wouldn't do that. I'm going to say that later on as we go on. But nevertheless, so I'm not against anti-science. I'm not all that. And I don't put my faith in things science can't figure out. Let me ask you this question before we get started, because this is all my own terms. Now I'm moving on to something else. And you don't have to answer right now, but I do want you to answer inside or write it down in your notes or whatever. What would it take for you to believe something? I ask this question to people if we're having a good dialogue about religion, if they're not a believer in anything. I ask them, what would it take? And what I have found is that people who are atheists don't believe, typically for one reason, maybe two or three, but usually there's a main reason. Usually it's something like this. My niece died of cancer. My wife walked out on me. Notice it's some traumatic, sad thing. And of course, the appropriate response to sad things and traumatic events is grief, not disbelief in God. And a lot of the new atheists is what they're called. A lot of people say this, but the argument tends to run, God doesn't exist and I hate him. There's a vitriol against him. Well, I'm not mad at Santa. I'm not mad at unicorns. I'm not mad, but not all atheists are the same. I've said that the first week, right? The first week, they're not all the same. I'm saying atheists is a generalization. But a lot of times, there's a real rebellion against it. Something's going on. And I think it's quite good to ask people, what's the real reason why you disbelieve? Or to say it this way, what would it take for you? Really, what would it take? And I've heard people ask that question. Some atheists say, if God to show up right now, if you write his name in the clouds, if I saw the name Yahweh on the DNA cell, and then they'll give answers, and I go, maybe. But if in conversation that hasn't happened yet, those kind of, I think, silly responses, I would say, really? But it's the same with people who believe anything. If you're a Christian, why really are you? Now, not everyone needs evidence, and that's okay. In fact, in Christianity, there's a group of people called the Reformed epistemology. That is, I think you just believe or you don't because God elects you. I don't have that view. Not everyone needs evidence, but I do. And if I answer the question, I will tell you right now exactly why. I'll answer the question and you can answer on your own. The real reason why I believe Christianity is true, the real gut-leveled, honest, it does come down to one reason. So this whole study could be a whole lot shorter. And I'll tell you in a second why I don't start and end with this. But I'm telling you up front, as usual, I'll show my cards. The real reason why I believe in Christianity is true is because I've seen too many lives changed when they give themselves to Jesus. That's the real reason. That's the real gut-level, God-honest reason. I can find no other conceivable explanation why I've seen so many people go from drugs or drinking or depression or hopelessness to whatever, give themselves to Jesus, and they change. Some take a little more time. I don't care, that's great. That's, whether time or not, I'm saying there's still change. Some happen like that. That's why, and that includes myself. I say that in the book I wrote when the skeptics challenged me. I said, on page 3 or 4 out the bat, I say, well, the real reason is because Jesus has changed my life. I know that might sound cheesy, but that is the real reason why. That is to say, I believe I really do have a relationship with God. I believe I talked to him this morning. He hasn't talked to me in a long time. He's talked to me through other people, but not directly in a long time. And that makes me sad. But I do have a relationship with him, and I know he's real, like I'm married. I know. So, honestly, it's very difficult to deconvert me because it's like deconverting me from believing that I'm married. Why do you know she exists? I give the analogy in my book of my brother. If you didn't believe in my brother, you can make up any kind of reason to believe I'm lying. We'll make him exist right now. Well, he doesn't live nearby me. Well, you could say, and you tell these stories. So I'm honest about that. I'm saying it's very difficult. No matter what you say in response to Christianity, it's difficult because it is very much like saying You could say, I'm delusional, I'm not really married. You could say that woman is just pretending. You could say on and on. You're right. Those are all possibilities. It's just that I just don't find that convincing. I'm convinced I'm married to her. I'm convinced that she loves me, I love her. To say it this way, I'm convinced that I have firsthand direct knowledge of God. Firsthand direct knowledge of God that provides the most compelling evidence for me. But if you're like me, and most of you probably are, if not all of you, most humans find firsthand knowledge the most compelling evidence. How do you know that Disney World exists? Have you been there? Well, no, my parents, and then, well, then how do you know? Everyone even asks the question that way. How do you know then? Then, the point is, why? Because you haven't been there yourself. You don't have what that's called direct evidence, direct firsthand knowledge. And that's like with all kinds of things. Now, this direct knowledge is falsifiable. It is falsifiable. My direct knowledge of God could be completely wrong. There are Mormons who say they've maybe experienced Joseph Smith, or maybe Muhammad, and they don't really experience Muhammad, but Hindus might say they experience Vishnu and Shakti in dreams. That's the problem. And that's why I said ago, well, I don't make this a real short study. The reason why I might tell a non-believer why I'm a real Christian, but I don't stay there up front and say, he changed my life, therefore it's true, is because I could be wrong. And there are two ways to make sure I'm wrong or right. There are two ways. And this works with anybody who says the main reason why I'm ex-religion is my firsthand knowledge. And I'm telling you, I tell atheists this before. I've told them online and in person. If you want to deconvert me, I'm helping you out. This is what you can do to change my mind, because I don't want to be wrong. One is you need to demonstrate that my belief in Christianity is unwarranted. And you can do it by one of two ways. You can either demonstrate that my religious experiences are delusional, that I suffer from some kind of psychological disorder, that I've never had any religious experience that I think I've had. Or two, you need to demonstrate that the evidence, what I believe supports my religious experience, is false. So either demonstrate I have a psychological disorder and I've been delusional all this time, or you demonstrate that the claims of Christianity that I think are corroborating evidence are false. That's how you do it. If someone says, I'm convinced I saw Elvis, I'm convinced I was abducted by aliens, or whatever, let's use the Elvis analogy. Well, you can believe it passionately, and I would say, I think you're passionately wrong. Now, why is that? Because I think there's no corroborating evidence. We can go to his tomb, exhume his body. He's dead. You didn't see him. Therefore, your experience was either somehow hallucinatory, delusional, bad dream, vision, but it has to be false because there's discorroborating evidence. It does not support it. That makes sense to you, right? That's how it is, hopefully, that's what it is in Christianity. I'm convinced I've had a religious experience, but I could be wrong. I could have corroborating evidence to go, David, you're just crazy. And they'll say, well, David, what would you do then? I would say Christianity is false. And I have no possible explanation of my religious experiences because I'm still convinced they happen. So now I don't know what to do besides say, I know I had those experiences and I had some bizarre biochemical reaction in my brain. Bizarre. And many people have had the same bizarre biochemical reactions in their brains. And that's the most confusing image. Until I die, I would say I never understood that, how that happened. Well, before you demonstrate that I'm delusional or have psychological disorder, and if you can, help me, because I really don't want to believe in something that's dumb. What I want to do is, since that doesn't convince most people, because they're going to say, Mormons say that, Buddhists say that, whatever, and that's a fair claim. Instead, what I do is, when I talk about religion, is I spend much more time on the second thing, which is evidence that I think corroborates my religious experience. Does that make sense? Yes, no? It's okay to talk, even though I said we can't ask questions, but good. So that's, what would it take for you to believe something? That's what I want you to ponder, because if you're like me, you probably do have a reason. And get gut level honest, what is it? And your reason doesn't have to be mine at all. But, okay, having said that, that's what I'm setting up. I think I do need evidence in any religion, because I think you need evidence to corroborate the religious experience. If a hardcore Calvinist did this, they wouldn't really care much, most of them, wouldn't care about evidence. They would say, no, you just know that you know that you know, and that's enough, and that's warranted belief, that's fine. And that's nuance, but I'm not that way. I think evidence matters a lot. And I want to talk about the nature of evidence right now. These are things you're going to hear if you haven't already. It's all out there on the internet. Scientists believe in facts and evidence. Religious people have faith. Religious people are proud of believing in something for which there is no evidence. Now, any Christian who's actually informed well by the Bible knows these statements are manifestly false. Now, I want to talk about evidence. In the United States, this is the federal court definition. Federal Rules of Evidence 401. Evidence is the existence or characteristics of which, it should be in your handout, right? So you don't have to write all this down in case you care about it. Are relevant and material. Relevant, of course, you know what relevant means. It pertains to the case. Material, I asked a really good lawyer, help me understand how you would define material. And he said something like the strength of the evidence. Does it really seem to really fit evidence? Evidence, now this is it. This is standard. This has been around for a long time. This kind of is mostly used. It's certainly American. It's the federal U.S. court. This is what they use all in American court system. But something like this is used in all the Western world. It's relevant if it has any tendency whatsoever to make a fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence. So it's evidence that can work for or against. Think defense attorney and prosecuting attorney. It's evidence that helps either side. And the fact is of consequence in determining the action. Now, nearly all, if not all, really I should say all, but I was being nuanced. All evidence in a courtroom is historical. Let that sink in for a second. It's historical evidence because you're trying to determine what already happened. It's historical, whether it's yesterday, this morning, or if it was 100 years ago, the DNA popped up and they found a skeleton and, oh, it's Al Capone. It's historical evidence. All the time. The courtrooms work that way all the time. And in general, and I did a good bit of self-research, and then my head started to hurt because I'm not a lawyer. Then when I was a kid, when I was a real kid, if you really want to know that, I wanted to be a lawyer. And it's because I think it was on Newsweek. Dad brought home a magazine, and on the front it had a cover of about 10 different faces, and they were lawyers, and it said how much they made per year. And it was millions of dollars. And I go, I want to be a lawyer. That was it. And so I chose the second most wealthy making, which was a pastor. Just a joke. And then not long after I moved to an astronaut. I want to be an astronaut all my life until I was called to ministry. All my life. 2 different kinds of evidence. The lawyer helped me. I did my research, and I went to a real lawyer and said, does this even look right? And he cleaned it up for me. We had a good long talk. There are 2 kinds of evidence. Only 2. Direct and circumstantial. Almost everything falls in those categories. Direct evidence is what it is. It supports the truth of an assertion directly. You don't need additional evidence or inference. So things such as first-hand witness. First-hand witness to the event. I saw it. That's direct evidence. I experienced it. I went to Disney World. That's direct evidence. Fingerprints, that's direct evidence that the finger had been there, at least a finger. Maybe not a person that could chop off a finger, but fingerprints means a finger was there. A murder weapon, all on the scene. DNA samples, that means it got there somehow. Cast of footprints, tires of the scene of the crime. Ancient evidence is like that, but they don't have tire prints. Pottery, DNA, coins, drawings, buildings, artifacts, manuscripts, these are all a form of direct evidence. I talked to the lawyer, he's here at the church. I asked him, I said, really typically, what's the most compelling evidence? And he said direct evidence from an impartial witness, especially if it's against the interest of the witness. That is, if someone said, I hated that guy, but he didn't do it. I know he was at my house. Or so something like that. But direct evidence is usually the most compelling. But when it comes to courtrooms, they don't care which one. They care about which one's the case. But most people in gut reaction typically is direct evidence. So to go back to my analogy, what I find the most compelling for Christianity is I think I have direct evidence for Christianity. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Circumstantial evidence is what it sounds like. You have to defend an assertion indirectly. You have to have an inference to connect it to a conclusion of a fact. Like a witness seeing a person over a dead person with a gun. You didn't see it happen, but you see it right afterward. That's circumstantial evidence. You have to infer that she did it. I heard a noise. I heard a bang. Human behavior in the past. Has Susan always slapped people? We pulled up 6 people who said they routinely saw Susan slap. That's called circumstantial evidence. That counts all the time. That's called character witness. That's used all the time. Various patterns of behavior and anything. Patterns of policies. Patterns of how it worked. What happened at work usually. And all kinds of stuff. Now on its own, circumstantial evidence allows for more than one explanation. Right? Of course it does. different pieces of circumstantial evidence may be required so that it corroborates the conclusions drawn from the other ones. And together, usually have a lot more circumstantial evidence, like a mountain, it builds up and builds up. And this is called, and this is a kind of reasoning that's used every day. Have you seen the show CSI? Right, there's like 30 different spin-off channels. Well, every single CSI episode, at least the ones I used to watch, Elaine loved it when it came on. Who are you? When it came on the show, they walk in the room, and it's something like this. They go and say, well, there's bullet holes, blood over there, stain, whatever. They come into a crime scene. And the first thing specialists start doing with a crime scene is analyzing. Of course, they take their pictures, they put little cones or stickers everywhere. And then what they do is, people go into it, they take as the facts of the case. That's the evidence. They take all that data together, label it all together, and then go before, you might say, a court. Both sides, someone says, this is the murder we think. One says, no, I didn't do it. Both sides look at the same evidence and infer from the evidence whether or not the person is guilty. And that's a kind of reasoning and logic. It's called abductive. Abductive reasoning. A-B-D-U-C-T-I, abductive. And that is where you look at various details and you infer to a probable cause, not certain cause. Courts never ask for certainty. They tell the juries that on purpose. It's not about 100% certain, is based on all the evidence, what's the most likely or probable, but you can tell. That's a form of abductive reasoning. Okay, makes sense so far? That's basic courtroom. That's what we do all the time. I prefer to think of it that way with religion, because I don't think it's a personal preference, but knowledge of the way the world works. I'm convinced that the proposition that Christianity is true, sorry, that shouldn't be hyphenated, it used to be spaced differently, can be demonstrated by both direct and circumstantial evidence. That's what I think. You don't have to think that. Atheists don't think that. But that's how I look at it. And I will begin in this study with circumstantial evidence and then move to direct evidence. I don't start with direct evidence. I already told you why. Because if I start there, they're going to say, oh, you could be delusional. All religious people say that. So what convinces most people is when you start with the circumstantial evidence. But when that happens, you usually go, well, that's circumstantial. Yeah, that doesn't matter at all. Wait. I don't find that convincing. Every day, all the time, across the United States of America, every courtroom does this all the time. Circumstantial evidence absolutely counts in any kind of argument. Why doesn't it count for this? It does to me a lot. And that works with any religion. If a Mormon comes up and says, I've got circumstantial evidence, I'm great, bring it, let's hear it. Don't rule it out of court. That would be very closed-minded. Bring it on. So what I like to do, and you don't have to think of it that way, what I like to do is when I think of evidence, I think of 3 layers of probability. The quite probable, the very probable, and the virtually certain. And the first 2, the quite probable and very probable, are with circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial, and then the direct is the virtually certain. So I like to do a little chart here. 3 layers of probability of David's humble view. And so what I do is, if I were to, when I talk to a non-believer, I depend on where they're at. If they were from square ones, from 0, like in my book, The Skeptic doesn't believe in anything, I start way back at the top. And then I move into very probable, then I go to virtually certain. That's exactly what I do in my book, and that's what I'm doing in my presentation. Well, you might meet a person who doesn't need steps 1 and 2. They might have enough evidence to Christianity to go, well, I really do think it's true, but I'm really hung up on this one thing. Well, then go to that one thing. Don't go, no. In the very beginning, God created that. Don't. And we'll talk maybe at the end about tips on how to talk to people. But what I'm doing now on purpose is to do what I think are probable. Notice how I did not say number 3 is absolutely certain, because I don't believe it is certain. I'm not certain I exist. I know I exist. I think it's very probable. But I just don't use that term much, certain. I do loosely, like, I'm sure the restaurant's right on the corner. But technically, philosophically, I don't do that. Okay, very quickly, any questions about anything so far about I covered? Does it make sense what I'm doing and why I'm doing it? Do you believe me when I say you don't have to do it this way?
When you said, did you say you're not 100% positive that religion is true? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, sir. That's what I said. And I said that last week, too.
And that's how you view it?
Yes, sir. That's how I view it.
That you can't be, you're not absolutely 100%
Yes, sir.
dead positive.
Correct. Yes, sir.
I believe I can be dead positive because of the Holy Spirit
Okay.
and the very existence of God and His creation and sending the Holy Spirit and changing my heart. All those things to me, I 100% believe all that. I don't doubt it for I stake my life on it. I don't doubt it for a minute.
Good. So you don't doubt. Good. And you
Yes.
stake your life on it.
That's just me.
Yeah, I would also stake my life on it, but I don't need to be 100. My view, I don't have to be 100% certain to stake my life on it. Philosophers like to do these mind games. For example, what if we were really a brain in a laboratory and they had different microbes or something stuck in our brain and they're making you think certain things. We're really in the matrix and we're really locked up like human batteries and the real world is run by machines. I mean, you could make up, and how would you disprove that? And I don't want to answer right now because I'm out of time. I'm saying these are kind of things that make a person go, how would you disprove that I'm not a brain? How do I disprove that I'm not dreaming right now in an alien's brain? How do I disprove that? Now, I think there's enough about my existence and my intuition and my cognition and whatever that leads me to think that's very improbable, but I cannot disprove it because it's possible. And since it's possible, I don't use the word certain. But I'm fairly certain that that's nonsense, but I don't use the word. But you can if you want. I'm not telling you what words to use, but that is why I don't, and that's why I don't. Okay, anything else? Questions before we move on? Let's stop. These are going to go pretty fast, but you're super smart. The first thing is quite probable. I think God is the best explanation for why anything exists at all. Ask yourself that question, why is there something rather than nothing? Even if the universe were eternal, which it's not, why is it here? Why is anything here whatsoever? If you say, well, the universe, it's been here forever. Why would the universe even need to be here, even if it's eternal? What possible? Everything about I don't use the word creation. Everything about the universe screams out it's contingent. I mean, why think that molecules and protons and atoms and electrons and photons need to be here? What is it about them that make it forever? And I think God is the best explanation. I think God is the best explanation. When we think about explanations of anything, why does anything exist? A thing must exist either because it must exist, and that's called necessary existence, or it's contingent. So here's a quick video I want to watch to talk about the same thing.
Amazing universe. Have you ever wondered why it exists? Why does anything at all exist? Gottfried Leibniz wrote, the first question which should rightly be asked is, why is there something rather than nothing? He came to the conclusion that the explanation is found in God. But is this reasonable? Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. The universe exists. From these, it follows logically that the explanation of the universe's existence is God. The logic of this argument is airtight. If the three premises are true, the conclusion is unavoidable. But are they more plausibly true than false? The third premise is undeniable for anyone seeking truth. But what about the first premise? Why not say, the universe is just there, and that's all? No explanation needed. End of discussion. Well, imagine you and a friend are hiking in the woods and come across a shiny sphere lying on the ground. You would, naturally, wonder how it came to be there. And you'd think it odd if your friend said, there's no reason or explanation for it. Stop wondering. It just is. And if the ball were larger, it would still require an explanation. In fact, if the ball were the size of the universe, the change in its size wouldn't remove the need for an explanation. Indeed, curiosity about the existence of the universe seems scientific and intuitive. Someone might say, if everything that exists needs an explanation, what about God? Doesn't he need an explanation? And if God doesn't need an explanation, then why does the universe need an explanation? To address this, Leibniz makes a key distinction between things that exist necessarily and things that exist contingently. Things that exist necessarily exist by necessity of their own nature. It's impossible for them not to exist. Many mathematicians think that abstract objects like numbers and sets exist like this. They're not caused to exist by something else, they just exist by necessity of their own nature. Things that exist contingently are caused to exist by something else. Most of the things we're familiar with exist contingently. They don't have to exist. They only exist because something else caused them to exist. If your parents had never met, you wouldn't exist. There's no reason to think the world around us had to exist. If the universe had developed differently, there might have been no stars or planets. It's logically possible that the whole universe might not have existed. It doesn't exist necessarily. It exists contingently. If the universe might not have existed, why does it exist? The only adequate explanation for the existence of a contingent universe is that its existence rests on a non-contingent being, something that cannot not exist because of the necessity of its own nature. It would exist no matter what. So, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. But what about our second premise? Is it reasonable to call the explanation of the universe God? Well, what is the universe? It's all of space-time reality, including all matter and energy. It follows that if the universe has a cause of its existence, that cause cannot be part of the universe. It must be non-physical and immaterial, beyond space and time. The list of entities that could possibly fit this description is very short, and abstract objects cannot cause anything. Leibniz's contingency argument shows that the explanation for the existence of the universe can be found only in the existence of God. Or, if you prefer not to use the term God, you may simply call him the extremely powerful, uncaused, necessarily existing, non-contingent, non-physical, immaterial, eternal being who created the entire universe and everything in it.
I like that. So you have to answer the question of why does it exist? Oh, I'll close all that out. Good. And I have heard modern scientists ask that question, and their response is, it just does. Or they'll say, if I say, where did it come from, or why does it exist, they would say it's a nonsense question. So the typical naturalist, the usual naturalist or materialist will answer it to say, there is no explanation, it just has to exist. It had to happen. You might find that probable, I don't find that probable. The second response is, why anything exists. The second is, why the universe had a beginning. It's standard belief amongst all scientists that it had a beginning. Whether you believe in a multi-universe or called a multiverse, there's a bunch of universes, or there's just one. That's a long story, which I might get into if you need questions about that. The Bible never says that the universe is 6,000 years old. Those are people called young earth creationists who believe that, but the Bible does not say that. That came from a bishop named Usher, not the dancer and singer, Spencer. Usher, U-S-S-H-E-R, and he came up with this number by misreading various generations in the Bible and came up with exact date. It was like March 12th at 6 p.m. I mean, he had exact date and time of when the universe happened. It's not biblical, but it's usually what people who believe in it say. It's what the Bible says. I got to trust the Bible, or I got to trust science. And that becomes a very disturbing false dichotomy. The universe is not eternal. Everybody knows that in science. It did have a beginning, and most estimates put it about 13.8 billion years ago. And this initial condition is typically called the Big Bang. Now, the cause of it, either it came out of nothing, the universe came from nowhere, no matter what, or it was caused. And what most scientists call this, back when a guy named Fred Hoyle, he was making fun of it. He called it a Big Bang. It's not big and it wasn't a bang. But in essence, there's a singularity that goes out, the universe goes out, 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 out. Now, Stephen Hawking and Penrose, they think there's no singularity. They think it curves like this, like the bottom of the South Pole. It's still a space-time boundary. The point is, it did begin. And what happened is, early on, there was something called inflation, where it sped up really fast and then slowed down enough. But actually what's happening in the universe is it's speeding up. And there are many ways to know this, many, many ways. But this was not believed. Everyone believed the universe was static, or the steady state theory, that the universe was eternal, backwards, forever and ever, until the 20s. A guy named Edwin Hubble, the Edwin Hubble telescope, you've heard of that. Edwin Hubble was looking at his telescope and discovered several things. One of the things he discovered when he started studying the same stars is that if you assume what's called the law of uniformity, if you assume the speed of light is the same speed here as it is in the distant universe, and we have every reason to think that, but it might be wrong. But if you assume it's the same speed of light, you can study the light waves. If you know that light, as it travels for a long period of time, the waves of light stretch out. And when the waves stretch out, it goes from dark oranges to red, which is why a sunset looks orange and red. The sun set about 6 minutes before you saw it set. It takes that long for sunlight to get here. So you're looking at the past every time you see a sunset. It's already past the Earth's rotation. And it's orange and red because the light waves have been stretched so far out. When you look at a telescope, stars do the same thing. Stars that are closer are more white and different colors. The farther away they are, the more red they are. And it's called the redshift. Red means it's been so stretched out that it's farther away. And so what we discovered was, if its redshift is occurring, it means that the universe is not steady. It means it's going out. It's expanding. If it's expanding, imagine if it's a video that's being played. That means if you push pause on the universe and click rewind, guess what that would mean? It would come back to a beginning. If it's expanding like a balloon, it means it had to go back. And it can't go back forever, because it means it would never have started in the first place. Imagine dominoes on your table that are set up, not like the real dominoes, but the fun dominoes, where they're stood up and you knock them over. Imagine you see when it's going on, you say, where was the first one? You say, there was no first one. It goes back forever. It's been doing this forever. That doesn't make any sense. At some point, there had to be the first one something had to be still to knock the rest ones over. Something had to necessarily exist, that's the first one, to get it going. Well, that's like the universe. If it was going and going and going, it can't go back forever. It had to start. Not only is it expanding, they discovered not long after that. In fact, Einstein didn't believe it. His mathematical theories, he made up fake numbers to make it not look like there was a beginning, because he didn't like the idea. And for decades and decades and decades, scientists fought against the idea the universe had a beginning for one reason. It looked like creation. You can look in the literature, it's all over the place. They hated the idea of the beginning because it sounded like Genesis. And Einstein didn't believe it. He went out to Hubble's telescope. He visited Edwin Hubble's telescope where he found the discovery and saw it himself and came out. There's pictures of this in black and white. And he goes, okay, he's right. There was a beginning. Years later, they discovered not only is there a beginning and it's expanding, but it's actually speeding up as it goes along. And they, again, like I said, the Big Bang terminology, because they were making fun of it, this Big Bang, they didn't want to believe it. It sounded too much like creationism. But whatever caused it, whatever it came, if it began, that means time and energy and space came into being. It came into being. Well, then the question is, why did it come into being? That means the universe is one big effect. Well, whenever there's effect, there's a cause. Let that sink in for a second. Now, this is a common thing. Most scientists will say, well, we're working on that. But technically speaking, as soon as you get past this, whether there's a singularity or not, if you're Stephen Hawking, most think there is a singularity. if you think there's something where it came from a beginning, all time, and it was in an unimaginably, infinitely dense singularity, why did it come here? Why did it pop into existence? What happened? And so they use a term, I'm going to say a little bit here, so stay with me for a second if it's okay. This Big Bang, you'll hear that terminology. Christians don't have to be scared of that terminology. It just means this is an explanation of the initial conditions of the universe when it first began. Doesn't mean there's no God. Doesn't mean that at all. But whatever that cause is before this initial Big Bang time, it must not be composed of energy or matter of any physical law. Why? Because it's what? It's on the other side of it, right? It hadn't been created yet. So whatever caused it can't be made of stuff because stuff wasn't around yet. And usually a naturalist is going to respond a few ways. Does that make sense so far? Am I too fast? Okay, stop me. This part of it is too fast. The Big Bang, or this terminology among scientists, it only deals with the initial condition of the universe. People typically respond, yeah, but the universe can create itself at the quantum level. Stephen Hawking and others say that. Okay, just for fun, let's talk about quantum field theory. You're welcome. Okay, so what most people say in response to this is, yes, universes, this is literally said all over the place. Lawrence Krauss, Stephen Hawking, it's all over. What they'll say is universes, Stephen Hawking said this, Stephen Hawking's the guy in the wheelchair, he has a robotic voice. He said, because of the laws of gravity, we now know universes can create themselves. And Lawrence Krauss says this all the time, that nothingness is not a nothing, nothing is a something from which something comes. And there's all this wordplay that's just, So what they're going to do is, instead of talking about what's on the other side of the universe, because remember, if you're an atheist, you're a naturalist, there's nothing. The fish tank is everything. So it's like, guys, the fish tank, what's on the other side of that curve? Nothing. It keeps going on and on and on around. If I said, but it began to exist, the fish tank popped in? Yes. Why? Because of the quantum field. And what they mean by that is, if you can see my picture enough, they'll say at the very, 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 very beginning, it's called Planck time, which is 10 to the negative 43. You can't go smaller than that in seconds because that means it didn't move, nothing happened. But at this tiniest time, if you were to zoom way in and like an unimaginable powerful microscope, you would find something it's called quantum field theory. Now, quantum field theory is still in its nascency. It's still kind of a baby theory, but it's got a lot of headway, particularly in mathematics. And simply put, thinking several things. Simply put, let me read this. I worked hard to read this paragraph. Let me read it, then I'll explain it some more. The fundamental stuff of particle physics is quantum fields, which wobble and wave and fill the universe. The whole universe is full of this quantum field. When a quantum field waves in a certain way, it behaves like a particle, or an antiparticle, or a collection of particles, whenever those waves interact. Imagine waves of an ocean. There's one special way that a field can be arranged in which there are no particles. That's called the vacuum. And that's what most people think when they say vacuum. They say there was a quantum vacuum. But the field is still there. And what happens in quantum mechanics is, and again, it's still in infancy, I'm going to erase this. Can I erase this? Is that okay? Mm-hmm. I didn't hear anything, so I'll go ahead. Every particle, like electrons have fields. So this is my electron, and let's say they're coming this direction, so they're headed this way. This one's headed this direction. Imagine, it's not this simple, but imagine it has a field around it, and this has a field around it. When these fields come near each other, these fields interact like waves of a pool or something. If you hit one side and the water's hit. When these fields interact, funny things happen. It can produce a particle, like a photon particle. A photon particle seems to pop into existence. And it goes over this electron and absorbs it. But whenever this interaction happens, it sends this electron this way, so they move on. A photon can pop into existence. Several photons can pop into existence. Some don't do anything at all. And they go back. They get absorbed. So at the basic level, the argument is in quantum field theory is that the reason why there are particles is because these quantum fields are fluctuating and they behave like particles. But since there's no scientific formula that tell us exactly how they work, they don't say how it's going to work. They call it probability. So they'll say there's no certainty in quantum field. It's just probably a photon will come out. Probably this will happen based on what we think is occurring. Okay, but the reason why this matters is because if you ever watch anybody on CNN or something, Stephen Hawking, whatever, they'll say, no, this is all been answered. We don't need God. We know that quantum fields make particles pop into existence from nothing. Why can't the universe just have popped into existence from nothing? I'm countering that by, and everyone does, quantum fields aren't nothing. They're a fluctuating sea of energy. And they're all through the universe. They have physical properties. They already exist. They don't pop into existence from nothing. They're the interactions of quantum fields that produce these particles. But it's not a state of nothingness. So really what they're talking about, let me use a different analogy if some of you look like you're tracking with me maybe. This is not nothing. And it's not creating a universe. If a photon pops up an electron, that's not a universe. But that's what Lawrence Krauss is going to go to every single time. The quantum fields are already there. They're already there in the beginning. They're governed by the laws of physics already. Well, that means there's already a universe. So by analogy, this is what the analogy I come up with I think I like. If someone said, and I said, I have a son, his name is Hayden. And they said, well, where did he come from? And I said, a zygote. Well, I had a video on quantum field theory. Do you care about that and move on? No? One of y'all? Well, here's a clip. It's shaky because
of field theory, or QFT. Although each theory has its own interesting peculiarities.
This is short.
I want to talk a little about some general truths of all quantum fields. In modern physics theory, one can picture all subatomic particles as beginning with a field. Then the particles also explain how particles interact. For example, suppose you have an electron moving along. The electron is a localized vibration of the electron field.
The electron field
If the
vibrating.
electron is a photon, then the quantum field theory way of looking at things says that some of the energy of the electron field sets up a localized vibration of a photon field, which then moves
So it
away.
makes another field.
So those are the essential features of quantum field theory. Theoretical physics simply imagines that ordinary space is full of fields for all known subatomic particles, and that localized vibrations can be found everywhere. These fields can interact with one another like two adjacent tuning forks. These interactions explain how particles are created and destroyed. Basically, the energy of some vibrations move from one field and set up vibrations in another kind of field. Now, of course, actually calculating something with this prescription is really very difficult. The math can be, well, pretty crazy. But the basic idea is really very simple. If you look around you, and you have even the smallest ability to think creatively, you can imagine these vibrations everywhere you look. I don't know about you, but I think that's an awfully cool idea.
He thinks it's cool.
It's
So
intentional that he was vibrating the whole time.
I know that's kind of ironic. Oh, not ironic, but yeah, he was. It's just imagine I'm a big field. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. I use an analogy of a zygote. Okay, this is a picture of an actual human zygote. If you're not familiar with zygote biology, kind of 101. That's what you were. As soon as sperm got inside of an egg and broke off the tail and joined together, the zygote is the earliest form of human, of Homo sapiens, the earliest biological state. You cannot get more primitive. Before this state is an egg and a sperm, separate. This is the earliest stage. If I said, I have a son named Hayden, you go, where did he come from? And I said, a zygote. Think about that for a second. Where did Hayden come from? A zygote, dummy. Does that answer the question? The answer is it does not answer the question. I would say, you've not answered the question. I asked you where it come from, and you gave me the earliest stage of development. That's not what I asked. To answer the question where Hayden came from, you've got to talk about a mom and a daddy. that formed a zygote. When you ask the typical person as a naturalist where the universe come from if it had a beginning, they're going to say quantum fields. That's like saying a zygote. That's not answering the question. They're talking about the initial state of the universe. I'm not debating. Scientists can debate, and that's awesome, all day long, how it all started, like when it first started. That's not the question. The universe began to exist. What happened before it? Now, another response is there's a whole bunch of universes out there, and that's such a huge topic. If you are interested in that, I'll be happy to talk to you afterwards about that. I really will be. Most people who believed in multiple universes, physicists, don't believe there are multiple independent universes, but rather there's one massive universe in which there are different bubble universes. And there's mathematical reasons for believing that. It doesn't answer the question. The universe began to exist. Even if there are multiple universes, they began to exist because they're expanding as well. The question is, if there was a beginning, what caused it? What caused it? And then, so that idea of what caused it sounds like this too.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedman and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Alvin Board, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
So one more time, if someone says, yeah, there are a lot of universes out there, it doesn't answer the question of the fact that it had a beginning. If someone said, yeah, well, universes can pop into existence all the time, they do in quantum field, the answer is, sorry, hold on a second. The answer is, no, they do it all the time in quantum field theory. No, they don't pop into existence in quantum field theory. Quantum field was already there. It's physical, it's a bunch of energy, it's a cosmic field, it's governed by the laws of physics. It's like saying, where did humans come from? Well, like a zygote. That doesn't make any sense. You're not far back enough. And if they said, well, by analogy then, scientists can't talk about before a zygote, because that's when we first meet a human in the womb. You go, now I understand. Of course, you're a naturalist. All that exists is the womb. Does that make sense? But I go, what if I told you? Before the zygote was two different things, an egg and a sperm. They said, that's nonsense. But that's why they're forced to say you have to start there, because there's nothing outside of that. There's nothing outside the fish tank or the womb. But if it came into being and popped into existence, by analogy, I'd say, do you think the zygote popped into a womb? Did this vacuum of energy and fluctuating it just pop into existence? And some people say, well, yes. Some say, no, it was eternal. Some say, we don't know, and you shouldn't bring up God. I mean, really, these are typical responses. Okay, I don't find that convincing. The universe began to exist. I'm going to ask the question of what caused it, and whatever caused it must not be made of matter and energy. There's got to be something outside. Now, this doesn't guarantee God exists. These are quite probable, and I'm building up a case. I think God's the best explanation why anything exists. I don't think God's the best explanation why the universe had a beginning. I think God's the best explanation for why there are constant in quantities that are fine-tuned for life. Okay? The laws of physics have several key parts. There are the building blocks of the universe, that's the stuff, atoms and molecules. Then there are the ways these building blocks can interact. These are fundamental forces like gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force. The laws of physics also presuppose the stage, the space and time in which the building blocks exist and interact. And the laws of physics have several key parts. I'll move on. Okay. There are numbers in the equations of gravity that you cannot predict. You just got to measure them. How strong is gravity? You can't predict how strong gravity is. You just have to measure it. These are called constants. Constants of natures. It's just, when this drops, I can write a formula for it. I can't, well, yeah, I think I can. But I can write the formula for this, that's the gravity formula. But I don't know how long. If someone said, let's make up something called gravity and predict how strong it's going to be, you couldn't do that. You just have to measure it. Now, why does gravity and all these constants have the value they have? Right now, no scientific theory tells us why gravity is that strong, why the speed of light is 186,000 meters per second. We just don't know, have a clue why, but it is constant. Now, fine-tuning is a technical term. Fine-tuned and fine-tuning is a technical term used by physicists. It was invented by physicists, not by preachers. It's a physicist term and refers to the contrast between a wide range of possibilities and a small little narrow spot of what will work. You know, at the gym, this is Spencer the other day right here. He was at the gym doing some squats and he had an accident. So, Spencer, he didn't wear that hat. It's different. Let's imagine for a second. This is Spencer, and he's doing his squats, and he's got this bar on his shoulders, and he's got, he does like 700 pounds or something crazy. He's got these, so he's he's on the bar, right? He's facing the mirror, very impressed with himself, and he should be. He's doing the squats. Now, this happened to me the other day. It's only happened one time in my life, and it's so weird how it happens. I didn't have that much weight either on it. You can put these little locks on the edge of the bar, and locks in case So that doesn't happen, right? That's the whole point. This guy had the weight, he's so much weight, it's on the very edge, so he couldn't lock it. So as soon as they start falling, left, right, you ain't going to stop it. It's just not going to happen. And the other day it happened to me as well a little bit. Well, just as slight as, what if I measured that for a second? So this is stable. So the question is, how far can I go down before the weights start wanting to come off? Either way. If I measure that, what's the distance? What angle on either side? Are y'all tracking with me? And that'd be a good experiment when you go to Planet Fitness. Put some light weight on there and say, how far can it go before I lose control and I end up dropping like the dude did? Either way. Does that make sense so far? I'm saying, okay, if I were to measure that, and I could measure that as a real good science experiment, and what's the exact angle? Okay, when I get to 6.53 degrees, I'm going to lose the weights. What I can do is, this is setting up parameters for possible, that's how far I've got. I've got 6 degrees before all things fall off and it's all ruined. Scientists, physicists do that with everything else in nature. How far can you go before a molecule falls apart? How far can the energy go in the strong and weak nuclear force before atoms can't even form? And what you do is, you go to the extremes. What if we set this number, this dial, just a little bit more? What would happen? Let's imagine for a second. And what they've discovered over and over and over and over again is that there are various laws of nature that cannot change but a tiny, 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 tiny bit. And I give you in my book, I got tons of examples. For example, in order to evolve in a life-sustaining manner, the universe must have maintained an extremely precise overall density. The precision of density must have been so great that a change in 1 part in 10 to the 15th power, that's 0.00001%, would result in a collapse or a big crunch of the universe, which means nothing would have happened. No stars would have formed, no galaxies. Not like different weird aliens from Star Trek. No carbon, no stars. Imagine a big fat dial, or imagine back to my analogy of my weights. Not 6.53 degrees, but 0.000000001 degree. If I barely budge it, all the weights fall off and I die. Because Spencer dropped all the weights on me. And constant after constant after constant after constant is overwhelmingly precisely fine-tuned. It's amazing. So here's 2 quick videos that are worth your time.
That many people had accepted the cultural narrative. 66, Time magazine ran a cover story asking, "Is God dead?" The cover reflected the fact that many people had accepted the cultural narrative that God is obsolete, that as science progresses, there's less need for a God to explain the universe. It turns out, though, that the rumors of God's death were premature. In fact, perhaps the best arguments for his existence come from, of all places, science itself. Here's the story. The same year Time featured its now famous headline, the astronomer Carl Sagan announced that there were 2 necessary criteria for a planet to support life: the right kind of star and a planet the right distance from that star. Given the roughly octillion planets in the universe, that's 1 followed by 24 zeros, there should have been about septillion planets, that's 1 followed by 21 zeros, capable of supporting life. With such spectacular odds, scientists were optimistic that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known by its initials SETI, an ambitious project launched in the 1960s, was sure to turn up something soon. With a vast radio telescopic network, scientists listened for signals that resembled coded intelligence. But as the years passed, the silence from the universe was deafening. As of 2014, researchers have discovered precisely bupkis, nada, zilch, which is to say 0 followed by an infinite number of zeros. What happened? As our knowledge of the universe increased, it became clear that there were, in fact, far more factors necessary for life, let alone intelligent life, than Sagan supposed. His 2 parameters grew to 10, then 20, and then 50, which meant that the number of potentially life-supporting planets decreased accordingly. The number dropped to a few thousand planets and kept on plummeting. Even SETI proponents acknowledged the problem. Peter Schenkel wrote in a 2006 piece for Skeptical Inquirer, a magazine that strongly affirms atheism, "In light of new findings and insights, we should quietly admit that the early estimates may no longer be tenable." Today, there are more than 200 known parameters necessary for a planet to support life, every single one of which must be perfectly met or the whole thing falls apart. For example, without a massive gravity-rich planet like Jupiter nearby to draw away asteroids, Earth would be more like an interstellar dartboard than the verdant orb that it is. Simply put, the odds against life in the universe are astonishing. Yet, here we are, not only existing, but talking about existing. What can account for it? Can every one of those many parameters have been perfectly met by accident? At what point is it fair to admit that it is science itself that suggests that we cannot be the result of random forces? Doesn't assuming that an intelligence created these perfect conditions in fact require far less faith than believing that a life-sustaining Earth just happened to beat the inconceivable odds? But wait, there's more. The fine-tuning necessary for life to exist on a planet is nothing compared with the fine-tuning required for the universe to exist at all. For example, astrophysicists now know that the values of the four fundamental forces, gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, were determined less than 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang. Alter any one of these four values ever so slightly, and the universe as we know it could not exist. For instance, if the ratio between the strong nuclear force and the electromagnetic force had been off by the tiniest fraction of the tiniest inconceivable fraction, then no stars could have formed at all. Multiply that single parameter by all the other necessary conditions, and the odds against the universe existing are so heart-stoppingly astronomical that the notion that it all just happened defies common sense. It would be like tossing a coin and having it come up heads 10 quintillion times in a row. I don't think so. Fred Hoyle, the astronomer who coined the term Big Bang, said that his atheism was greatly shaken by these developments. One of the world's most renowned theoretical physicists, Paul Davies, has said that the appearance of design is overwhelming. Even the late Christopher Hitchens, one of atheism's most aggressive proponents, conceded that without question the fine-tuning argument was the most powerful argument of the other side. Oxford University professor of mathematics, Dr. John Lennox, has said, "The more we get to know about our universe, the more the hypothesis that there is a creator gains in credibility as the best explanation of why we are here." The greatest miracle of all time is the universe. It is the miracle of all miracles, one that inescapably points to something or someone beyond itself. I'm Eric Metaxas for Prager University.
Here's one more video I want to show you. This is a similar concept. This is different.
From galaxies and stars down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. to get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
the average atheist, atheist will just say, in response to, no.
The very structure of our...
They're going to say either, if you ask them, why do you think the universe is fine-tuned for life? They usually just say, there's no explanation. Or one day we'll try to figure it out. But you can ask them what you want and whatnot. But I remember this last one. If there's any questions about that? Any questions about fine-tuning? No? Have you seen this before? Have you heard that before? It's pretty stinking amazing. I think I put in your book, your handout there, for example, like the Fortunate Universe. But the first one, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Do you see that one there? That's by Hugh Ross. See that in your handout? I put that there, right? I'm not looking at your handout.
Oh, yeah.
Hugh Ross?
Page 5.
Yeah, page 5. So I have a little bit of graphic references after all these handouts. I hope you're following along. That'll help you to see the books. That book, and all of them are, but that book particularly, Hugh Ross, it's jaw-dropping. Every page was another phenomenal fact about the universe. It's phenomenal. I mean, the placement of our galaxy, the speed at which our solar system rotates in the arm of our galaxy must be fine-tuned. Because our galaxy's spinning. If it spun differently, our solar system would collide with other solar systems, but it won't do that. It's really got the perfect speed. Perfectly distanced from the black hole in the middle of the Milky Way. Not too far, not too far away, not too close. I mean, it goes on. It's amazing. It's amazing. The last, unfortunately, I think I'll just stop there. Do you have any questions about anything we've covered so far? That's the most abstract scientific we're going to do. So you made over the hump. Everything else is simple. But that's, if you follow me so far, it's not like this for the next 5 weeks. That was the most abstract. Sorry, thank you. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
I was saying it was good. It was interesting.
Good. Amen. Good. Thank you. Amen. Yes, ma'am, Linda.
And with all of this, I do have to ask, as I need to know, do you believe in the Trinity?
Do I believe in the Trinity? Yes, ma'am, very much so. I taught a 4-week class on that. That's also available online on my podcast. I have handouts to it.
Okay. So I realize that this is the scientific acknowledgement of that God exists, the proof for those. Just like the disciple Paul, Matt, he was a very educated and well-informed man, but it wasn't until the Holy Spirit knocked him off his horse, his high horse, I like to refer to it, that he really got the concept of God. So this is the basis of what this is, and are we going to be going more toward all the aspects of God, the Trinity? We touched on Jesus, and we have touched on God, but I haven't heard anything about the Holy Spirit yet.
Oh, great question. That's yes and no. If I start at the end of what you said, no, we won't go into the qualities of God because the study is more arguing that Christianity is true. As far as the nature of God, I did do a study on Trinity that if you want, I'd be happy to. It's online, all the videos recorded on Facebook, and I have handouts and stuff like that. So at the end of this study won't be, let's describe God's characteristics. But I did do that fairly carefully for 4 weeks before this, 2 studies ago. When was this last study, wasn't it?
3 studies.
3 studies ago? Anyway, so I'd be happy to get information to you. But just, and sorry if I'm repeating myself if that bothers anybody, but just to remind you, because this is a good thing to pick up on, just remember the bigger picture as I'm leading us down these dominoes. The bigger picture of these, is it 9 things I put in here? 9 or 10 things that point to God? Something like that? 9 things I think are very probable. Yeah, 9 or 10. I have 10 on my list. I'm not sure if I got it. Remember, these are forms of evidence. And the first 2 kinds are circumstantial. And the first big one that says, these are things I think are quite probable. These are things like something in a crime scene where I walk in and see bullets in the blood and the bodies and go, something happened here. That's what I think about these things I'm presenting now fairly quickly. I think these are things in a crime scene. I don't think these things at all prove God exists. I don't think these things go, aha, it must be God. I think, in fact, for me, these are a cumulative case of circumstantial evidence that act like a big fat finger. Look that way. And so I think that's how they act. And so I'm starting as broad as possible for people who don't believe in God at all. I don't ever start with the Bible. I don't ever start with the Bible if someone doesn't believe anything. If someone already believes that there is a God and they already believe they're moral people and so forth, I start where they're at. But if someone says, I don't believe any of that stuff, I don't say, look at what Jesus said, because they don't believe in Jesus as authoritative. You might as well say, look what Muhammad said, look what Joseph Smith of Mormonism says, so they won't care. So someone who doesn't believe anything, like I was saying back with my book, I assume in this study, I'm just, to help the most amount of people, I'm starting from bare bones. So if I meet a person on the street who doesn't believe anything, they're just a straight up naturalist. All that exists is matter and energy. And for those people, I have three categories. Those things that point to God, and there's usually things about science and morality that I think point. And it's a cumulative circumstantial. The second thing that gets more probable, that still points, but I think it's even more convincing, and that's Jesus in the Gospels. That's stage 2. We're halfway through stage 1. Stage 3 is where I think it's quite certain. That's my direct knowledge of the Holy Spirit. I will talk about the Holy Spirit, like what John said. I'm not talking about it first because, well, I keep saying it. I don't talk about it first because if I'm talking to a normal naturalist or an atheist, they're going to say, I'm proud of you. I'm glad you had your religious experience. So do Mormons, so do Jews, so do anybody. So I don't care what your religious experience is. You could have been delusional. So instead, I leave that last. Unless a person in conversation wants to talk about that first, I'll talk about it. I'd be happy to talk about it. But I'm deliberately starting from the broadest things I think point toward God, and we're getting more and more pointing harder until I get to that direct evidence. Does that make sense?
Excellent explanation.
Go. So that's why it's not because I disbelieve in the Bible. It's not because I very much spent my whole life of. But this stage is just those things that make you go. There's a song by the 80s called "Make You Go Home." Is that what it is, Tasha? Make things that make you go home. I know. Come on, my 80s queen. And that's I think about things that make you go, huh? Really? The universe began to exist? Why is that? Why does anything exist? It's fine-tuned for life, and I'll have many more. Like, why are the laws of nature? Why is the universe right? These things, really? And so it's like thing after thing, like walking to a crime scene. Like my children's bedroom. It tells me something. I can tell my daughter has been there by the stuff that's on the ground, how messy it is. I go, Julia's been in this room. It's pointing that direction. You go, you didn't see her. That's right. That would be direct evidence. But this is tons of circumstantial evidence that makes it very likely it was Julia. Well, you could say it popped into existence from nothing. You could say it was all random. You could say someone else, a robber broke in and was disheveled at looking for stuff. You can go, you could. Well, answer all those stories. But at the end of the day, I still don't find your alternate stories any bit convincing. I think my gut reaction was the most convincing. And that's what this is for me. If a naturalist on stage beside me, he or she would say, I don't. I think a robber came in the room. I think there's tons of other explanations besides God did it. I think you're lazy and stupid. In a nutshell, that's what I've been called, and that's a normal response. If they're respectful, they won't say that. They will say, you're wrong, and that's not a good explanation. So I said that week 1, like in a courtroom, you're both making a case, and you get to make up your own mind. But I'm telling you why I find it most convincing. So thank you for that. So yeah, this is as broad as I can make it.
And I understand so much when you kind of encompass, I don't have your syllabus or your objectives for this, and so I'm only having what I have here in front of me.
Good, yeah, no, sure. Yeah. And I appreciate that. And please always feel free to ask questions, because I want to make sure, because I know this is it's a big topic, and especially if you're new to it, it can be exceptionally difficult. And I'm trying to, though this is fast and maybe too slow for some of you, I don't want us to get wrapped up in the trees because there's a big forest. But if there's things that intrigue you, that's why I put those books in your handout. Go read. Those are just suggestions. You can read whatever you want, but those are good starting places on all these topics. The library's free. You can get all these books on Amazon. Read to your heart's desire, and you can read counter. I try my best to give counter examples. I try to give books, even my atheists say, if you want an opposing view, I put that. I don't put that for every one of them, usually just because of time, but you make up your own mind. So yeah, go ahead.
I was curious, you're referring to the Big Bang and such. Sorry. I was just wondering what your personal thoughts are as far as Big Bang and the creation account in Bible as far as God just saying it and it is. And I don't know if this is really a fair question even to be asking, because the Big Bang is probably a very general term that can mean all sorts of different things, and so I don't know that there's necessarily a way for me to define.
No, it's a good question, and that's that question, which I was waiting for someone to ask. I think I don't have your hand out in front of me. If you'll look at one of those questions I mentioned, John Walton. What number is that? I meant to grab the student version of this.
Okay, yeah, the last one. Four.
Yeah. So page 3?
Yeah.
Four, page 4. Yeah, good. My own view, and because of time I didn't read all this, but what is that? You know, in the beginning. Okay, here's some Bible verses I can give you. And my understanding, this is a long story, but in my D group in the mornings we're covering this. I concur with most Old Testament specialists that ancient Hebrews, like all ancient people of the time period, didn't think of the universe coming into existence from nothing. When they told their cosmology stories, Daddy, where did the universe came from? They wouldn't use the word universe. They would say, where did the world, probably. When they would ask where did it come from, any person, and that's based on all the literature we have. If there's documents we lost in time, we lost them. But everything we have from Egypt, Babylon, and the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, they all started with some kind of primordial cosmic stuff. I like to call it cosmic Plato. And there's some formless void, which is what he used, tabahu or something in Hebrew. The spirit goes over the waters of the deep. So the author of Genesis 1 sees that there's this cosmic stuff over which God hovers, and then from which he takes this chaos stuff and then separates water and land pops up and so forth. He orders it. And when he gives it a function and a name, that's how we mean by, quote, creating it. Let me say it this way. If I time traveled to 3000 BC and asked an ancient Israelite, they're not Israelite, ancient Jew, 3,000 years ago, or even farther, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, I said, do you think the universe came from nothing? They're going to say, what does universe mean? Okay, what is, do you think where the earth came from? Oh, to me, where everything came from the very beginning. I think they would tell the same story. I think they would say, well, in the very beginning, there was this stuff, and God ordered it and gave it names. And I would say, well, nowadays, did you know in 3,000 or 4,000 years from now, we're going to start saying the universe came from nothing. That is, there was no beginning. Now, having said that, I don't think it's a modern idea. I think the idea that God brought something to some degree from nothingness, I just don't find that in Genesis. Like Psalm 33:6, John 1:3, and maybe Hebrews 11:3. Psalm 33:6, John 1:3, and perhaps Hebrews 11:3 are the only texts I can find that seem to what we might call ex nihilo. So I don't think ancient people thought of the origin of a universe like we do today. I don't think they would have a conceptual framework for it. I think that it would be very difficult for us to articulate to them this kind of stuff. And quite to reverse it, I think it'd be difficult for them to try to articulate to us how they understood origins. Not because they're idiots and we're smart, but because they're asking different questions. And I'm convinced John Walton is right. I'm convinced of it because you looked at all the ancient literature. They ask questions of, why are we here? Who's in charge? What's the function of the earth? We ask, where did it come from? What's it made of? And they're answering different questions. So therefore, the stories they tell and that we tell are different because we're answering different questions. Modern naturalists do not ask the question, why are we here? What's its function? That's agent causation. Tim, that's a stupid question. That's a nonsense question. There's no such thing as agent. We're not designed, doesn't matter. Jews and every ancient person go, yeah, we are. It's stupid not to think we're not. I mean, of course we are. So why did the gods make us? And when we answer those questions that way, then it's amazing how much Genesis is both in some ways similar and in some ways very distinct from their neighbors. And I go on for a long time, but John Walton does. So, and I'll say this other last thing, and find any evidence in the ancient world that they had any genre of science textbook. That's a very modern genre. And so I do not read Genesis as a science textbook. I don't read anything in the Bible as a science textbook. It doesn't mean they can't get some science correct. It just means if they do, I'm convinced it was inadvertent. I agree with John Walton and many other Old Testament specialists. I don't think God corrected their pre-scientific worldview. I don't think God cared at all if they had a bad understanding of black holes. Just like I don't think God gives a rip that we don't understand what's going to be like 1,000 years from now, if we're still here. What a bunch of dummies, 2018, dummies, singularity. Why didn't God inspire the church in 2018 to tell more about these extra dimensions that we discovered? Because he didn't want to. I think like it is today, it was that way when he first started revealing himself. We get to discover. I think he loves the fact that we get to discover, and he goes, keep discovering. What I do care about is what you think about me. So I will reveal me. Let's get that right. But you can have false beliefs about the way nature works. No, there's not water up there. That's not how cumulus clouds work in rain, but I don't care. I created it. I'm your boss. I did it for you. So I think it's a different thing. Now, not everyone has that view. You can be Christian and not have that view. Smart people disagree with what I just said. Most Old Testament specialists agree with what I said. That doesn't mean we're right. I'm just putting that out there. So you can read books by smart people who believe the earth was made 6,000 years ago. You can read smart people who read that. I don't find them convincing, but you might. But John Walton is just one example of what I think is a very compelling view. That's a great question.
We're never smart enough to totally know the truth until we cross to the eternal and cross into eternity, and then only if God desires for us to know. It's too wonderful for us to really understand. It's beyond human understanding. We're speculating a lot based on input.
Right. I agree with you that I think we'll be fully aware in the world to come. See, I'm convinced that the amount of cognition we're able to maintain, is limited by a brain capacity. I think that we do have a soul. We are a soul with a body. And I think the soul has a rational capacity. I talked about this in one of the studies somewhere, Trinity or somewhere. But the mind uses the brain. And the brain is limited by your biochemistry. Einstein had a better brain than I do, and that's not my fault. It's not his fault. He was just born that way. But no matter what it is we do, the human brain will never develop more. We'll never get that much smarter. And the reason why is because the human brain comes out of a female mama's baby womb pelican, whatever it's called. So the fact is, when babies are born, the the skull has to fit through the canal. So it is always limited forever.
So we can blame women for our lack of
Yes.
intelligence?
That's if you take anything from tonight's lesson, I want you to take that one point. That is what I learned tonight was. So we are limited. The brain, our brain cannot, whether you believe in evolution or not, let's say you do, it cannot evolve more than what it is because it has to fit out of the canal. So our brain is limited. We'll always have limited comprehension, always, no matter what it is. That's my view. And I think we will not have that limitation when our soul is separate from our brain. We'll have our mind will be set free. But real set free, not like LSD set free, real set free. That's a drug. Drug humor. Bye, Pastor. You're welcome. Any questions? I don't know what LSD is. Don't ask me that. I see that Navy hat. Good. Let me say a prayer for us. Is that okay? Thank you, God, so much for being amazing. Help us be able to understand more how the world works, because we know it sure seems to me points to you. Help us be articulate, wise, gentle, honest with people with whom we disagree on these issues. Help us love them and be genuinely interested and have something to say when they ask us why we believe what we believe. That is, I don't know, honorable or respectable and beyond just, oh no. So give us the wisdom to know what to say. That's true. And of course, please give us the courage and strength to listen very carefully and not see people as arguments to be won or people just to convince, but people to love. Help us love and help us be lovable. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Thank you all.